PlayStation 1 versus Nintendo 64 was and has been way more impactful than Xbox versus PlayStation ever was. PS1 versus N64 is the reason why Nintendo carved its own lane with gaming philosophies instead of just making super powerful supercomputers. PS1 versus N64 is the reason why analog sticks and rumble controls are industry staples to this day. PS1 versus N64 is the reason why three-dimensional games even exist and why 3 dimensions is the preferred amount of dimensions to have for a game. I'm counting Doom as like 2.5D. And to be honest, after 30 years of PlayStation versus Nintendo, it's kind of hard to figure out who came out on top. I mean, really, what do y'all think? A lot of people nowadays just have PlayStations and Nintendos both. Let me know in the comments below. I'm gonna give my honest opinion. My honest opinion after doing all the research and setting up this whole video. I'm gonna give my honest opinion after I lay out the facts for y'all. Hey, what's up, y'all? It's the Bread Show, and today we're gonna be doing something a little different. You know what I'm saying? This video, I think it's seeming like it's gonna be a little bit longer of a video because it's a lot to cover in this topic. So sit back, grab you a little drink. You know what I'm saying? I got one here myself, and you know what I'm saying? Enjoy. Hope you like the video. If you like the video, subscribe for more, and also hit that notification bell so that when I drop at Friday 11 a.m. on Eastern time, whatever time that is around for you in the world, y'all will know and y'all will be the first to see. PS1 versus N64 has done groundbreaking things for the video game industry more than I think people even realize. So I feel like it would be best to start out with my personal history for both and why I feel like I have a unique kind of view on this whole thing. Now, let me be clear. I wasn't even thought of when all this was first going down in the mid 90s, but all my consoles that I've ever had until I had the money to buy my own consoles are hand-me-down. So even though this Nintendo 64 came out in 1996, I was playing it in 2006 at like the age of 3 or 4 years old. Now, I don't remember all the games I had, but I sure do remember my constant rotation: Pokemon Stadium, Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Killer Instinct, and this one snowboarding game that I've been trying to find the name of for the past almost 20 years since I've been playing it. And when it came to playing PlayStation games, I would just usually go to my older cousin's house, and I think his consoles were hand-me-downs too. And we were just playing games that were 10 years old. We didn't care because no one was gonna tell us that the games are old. Fast forward to now, and now I have a YouTube channel where I do a lot of Nintendo content, but also behind the scenes, when I'm playing games by myself, I actually play a lot of PlayStation games, and arguably I play more PlayStation games than I do Nintendo games nowadays. I mean, say it ain't so, but I definitely put 80 hours into Dragon Quest XI this year, and I'm deep in the Stellar Blade right now. So I'm gonna try my best to give a fresh take on a 30-year-old debate. Before the beef, Nintendo and Sony were actually pretty cool. You know what I'm saying? They were both Japanese tech companies that came up before the tech boom. Nintendo was already successful in the gaming industry, and Sony was already successful in the CD kind of tech industry. So they wanted to work together to make a CD-ROM type thing to rival the Sega Genesis at the time. And it was going to be an extension of the already out and already successful SNES. But just like every other time when it comes to two greats collaborating with each other, a beef starts. A professional beef starts. The contract that Sony presented Nintendo with actually gave Sony way more control than Nintendo was comfortable with, and also gave it way more profit shares than Nintendo was comfortable with. And obviously Nintendo felt like they had control because they had already started and made themselves successful and gave themselves a name in the gaming industry. So it's safe to say that Nintendo really tried to lowboy Sony, you know what I'm saying, really sun them and say, hey, I brought you into this world and I could take you out. And as a matter of fact, they tried to, because in 1991, Nintendo announced that they were going to be doing the same exact idea, but with Philips instead of Sony. And that, as you can imagine, was embarrassing for Sony and really set them off. By the way, Philips was a rival to Sony, and also not a Japanese company. It was Dutch. So that was the start of the beef, and this beef, unlike Xbox versus PlayStation, had an actual history to it and why it started. Xbox versus PlayStation was just like two people that happened to do the same things and were automatically put against each other. And Nintendo versus PlayStation has real lore to it. Sony started from scratch. Nintendo decided that they were gonna do the whole Philips thing in 91. Sony came out with the PS1 in 1994 with 3-dimensional graphics. Now, Sony used a lot of their already established relationships with third-party game developers to make console-exclusive games for their system, like, for example, Squaresoft and Final Fantasy VII specifically. That is very important. And it's very important because all the other Final Fantasies were available on Nintendo consoles. But after the whole Nintendo Sony beef, obviously that ended with Final Fantasy VII, arguably the greatest Final Fantasy. Ironically, it's argued that Final Fantasy VI is better, and that came out on a Nintendo console. So it basically was a peak of Final Fantasy games, and Nintendo did not get a piece of the Final Fantasy VII. Now the PlayStation used disc. Obviously that was the original idea that they were going to do with Nintendo before they started acting up. And the reason why they chose disc is because Sony was already experienced using disc, because that's what most of their products revolved around at the time. Discs were cheaper to make than cartridges, which was what Nintendo was using, and also had the ability to put more information on them. So by default, they were already going to make bigger games for the PS1 than Nintendo could have ever done. Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid, GTA, Silent Hill, Tekken, all of those games came out on the PlayStation 1, and it sold 102 million units. And mind you, this came out in 1994. That was gonna be really hard for Nintendo to ever compete with that. But compete they did, and they tried with the N64. N64 had obvious challenges. Nintendo was set on using cartridges and not using discs for some reason. I don't know, maybe out of stubbornness. So yes, the cartridges had smaller or more empty games, but the load times were way faster. However, one of the big challenges that the Nintendo 64 faced was that third-party game developers were not comfortable putting their games on on cartridges, because they were just inferior to discs in everything but load time. You gotta think, the Nintendo 64 cartridges were bigger. That seems like it shouldn't mean anything, but when it comes to packaging and transportation, physical units, all they had back then was physical units. The fact that the cartridges were bigger is an actual, deficit. And like I said before, the cartridges could not put as much information on the game. So if you were to go back and play Super Mario 64 right now, you'll see that it's a lot more empty than you remember. Same thing with Ocarina of Time Open World. And for these reasons, third-party companies kind of stayed away from the Nintendo 64. So Nintendo used their own IPs to put out games like crazy. And with the limited resources that they had, they made some bangers. Super Mario 64, Pokemon Stadium, Mario Party, Mario Kart 64, Doom 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, Super Smash Bros., Paper Mario, GoldenEye 007. And that's just to name a few. To compete with having the inferior console, they had to compete solely off of innovation and game design and everything like that. And all of their main and major IPs got individual mini franchises that are still celebrated to this day. And even though the Nintendo 64 was the inferior console, they had some things that stuck around in the gaming industry today. Yes, the controller was ugly, but one thing it did have that obviously people loved was an analog stick. And if you look at the PlayStation 1 controller, there is no analog stick. It's just a D-pad and then the triangle, square, X, circle. This analog stick allowed for 8-directional movement as opposed to the omnidirectional movement that we have today, but it has to start somewhere, 8-directional movement. And the Nintendo Switch had 4 slots where you can add controllers, which meant it supported 4-player local play. And before online gaming was even a thing, this was huge. And it's specifically huge for games like Mario Party, where it's kind of hard to enjoy Mario Party by itself. But with all that being said, Nintendo 64 was it had kind of more of a cult following. It only sold 33 million total units. And yeah, it just had more of a cult following. People who played those games, obviously they love Mario Party. There's like 10 of them now. Obviously they love Paper Mario. There's like 5 of them now, and they're getting remakes made. Obviously they love Smash. Obviously they love Mario Kart. We have like 5 Super Smash Bros. Now, and Mario Kart racetracks from N64 are still being featured in Mario Kart Deluxe, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So Nintendo was doing something, but they weren't doing enough. At the end of the day, they did come out with a technologically inferior console 2 years after the PS1 had debuted. Nintendo packed heat with the first party releases. However, it was obvious that the culture was with PlayStation 1, and that was quickly proven by the time that the PlayStation 2 released, because that might just be the greatest video game console of all time, shown by how hype that release was. Funny how the PlayStation 2 was getting released and hype and all that crazy stuff was happening, and I was definitely, for surely, in my room as a 3-year-old playing the Nintendo 64, totally amazed by Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon and Paper Mario and all those. No, not Paper Mario, Super Mario 64 and all that stuff. Oh, to be a child without social media telling me that I was outdated. Some people argue that just based off the numbers, the PS1 obviously won. You sold 70 million more copies than the Nintendo 64. But some people argue that the Nintendo 64 won because of the crazy game catalog that came out on that system. It rivals the Xbox 360 game catalog. That catalog rivals any other catalog. It might just be the best catalog in history. So some people argue that the N64 won. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the consumers won. The gaming industry as a whole won. I mean, we got analog sticks now. We got CDs now instead of cartridges. We had two companies that were in their own lanes, but still competing heavily against each other, and they came out with heat every time because they had to. And after the Nintendo 64 versus PS1 debate, it kind of made a great demarcation in the two gaming philosophies for PlayStation and Nintendo. Sony obviously went the powerhouse route, powerhouse consoles with great first party games like Spider-Man that we still play and acknowledge to this day. Nintendo went with the weird but amazing route, the weirdly amazing kind of route, where they started innovating like crazy. I mean, yeah, they came out with the GameCube that had, the tiny discs, but after that, they immediately followed that up with the Wii, which by all accounts was super weird, but also super amazing, and everyone had one. As a matter of fact, thinking back on it, the Wii was just a objectively weird console. You put a little monitor on top of your television screen, it did dance moves for points, with something that looked nothing like what a controller ever looked like. To be fair, a Nintendo 64 controller also didn't look like anything we've ever seen before, but still. So yeah, Sony went the powerhouse route, Nintendo went the weirdly amazing route, and you could argue that they're still on that same route to this day, with Nintendo coming out with 3-dimensional handheld systems and the Nintendo Switch, which is like a home console but also a handheld at the same time. And by the way, Sega got left in the dust. It's crazy how they teamed up to beat this one entity, and they ended up trying to beat each other while leaving the previous enemy behind by far. Nowadays, Sega is just synonymous with Sonic. And the memories of Sega was gonna get left in the dust with Xbox coming around the corner. And the reason why I say that this was more impactful than PlayStation versus Xbox, because we're living through PlayStation versus Xbox right now, obviously. And the advancements that we got in PlayStation versus Xbox were more gradual, you know what I'm saying? If I'm being honest, the PS5 is not that much different than the PS4. It's just more powerful. It's not like they added an analog stick or they added rumble control. It's generally the same thing. But PlayStation versus Sony, but PlayStation versus Nintendo, we got a lot out of that. And at no point did either side look at each other and be like, hey, I'm trying to do what you doing. And if you're wondering how long the beef part of it lasted a while. Final Fantasy didn't come back to Nintendo until like around 2019, when Final Fantasy VII, not the remake, but the original Final Fantasy VII was made available on Switch. I still don't know if the original Final Fantasies 1 through 6 are available on the Switch right now. But the reason why you won't find Square Enix games on Nintendo systems is because of that beef. And as a matter of fact, to talk about how they're kind of reconvening nowadays, Super Mario RPG, if you play that game, if you load it up, if you start it right now, you'll see that Square Enix, or Squaresoft, which whatever its name was at the time, you'll see that at the beginning it was made by Square Enix. Obviously, with PlayStation and Nintendo's relationship being repaired, that game can now get remade and brought back into the public instead of swept under the rug under, petty, CD-ROM collaboration beef. And now Nintendo Switch fans and users can play great Final Fantasy games and Super Mario RPG. And after learning all of this, after researching all of this, I just have one question. Yes, there were a lot of winners in the beef between PlayStation and Nintendo. Of course, the consumers, PlayStation and Nintendo individually. But it makes me question who was a loser. Obviously, Sega was a loser, but then you think about it, and then it's like, was Dragon Quest a loser? And most of you listening right now, you probably don't even know what Dragon Quest is. You probably don't know why that's important or whatever. And I don't blame you, because the game is huge in Japan. The game is huge in Japan. That's all I'll say. I'll make a whole video about it later, but the game is huge in Japan, and there's 11 of the game. And there's 11 of the games, there's a whole timeline, there's a whole fan base, but it's not huge in America because of translation issues and things like that. And that seems like something that was up Nintendo's alley, but it fell in the cracks and all the other stuff. And maybe, is it because of the beef? Is it because, I don't know, maybe if PlayStation and Nintendo never split up, Dragon Quest would be a main state in the West too, but I don't know. Maybe there's more losers than we could even think of. But at the end of the day, it was objectively good thing. I just wonder if there was losers. Anyways, stop rambling. So my final thoughts on who came out on top. Who's better, Nintendo or PlayStation? Really, it's a close one. I know what you're thinking. Kyle, you upload a whole bunch of Nintendo videos. Obviously, you're gonna say the Nintendo 64. That is, I wouldn't say that. I like I said before, I play a lot of PlayStation video games, and I spend more time with PlayStation than Nintendo. I just know more about Nintendo, and I have more topics to talk about it. And honestly, I figure there's going to be a point on the channel where I talk about PlayStation games more. So I'm pretty unbiased, I'd say, when it comes to Nintendo versus PlayStation. But I will say this. When it comes to PlayStation 1 versus Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1 handily. They sold almost 3 times as many units. But when it comes to overtime, Nintendo definitely took the win with this one. Let me tell you, we talked about Super Mario 64. I mean, without that, we wouldn't have Galaxy, we wouldn't have Sunshine, and we wouldn't have Odyssey. Pokemon Stadium. Without that, we wouldn't have Pokemon Stadium 2 and the other 2 weird Pokemon spin-off games that with the Shadow Pokemon Coliseum and all that other stuff. Mario Party. There's been like 14 of them. Seriously. Mario Kart 64. We know how big that is. Doom 64. I'm not gonna count that. Banjo-Kazooie. We know how big that is. Majora's Mask. Ocarina of Time is arguably the greatest video game of all time. Super Smash Brothers is still big to this day. And then obviously Paper Mario has still got a serious fan base. GoldenEye 007. You can post a TikTok video right now and get famous right now just by mentioning that game in the pause music. So I think objectively over time, Nintendo won handily. Obviously Nintendo won because they didn't get it in sales, obviously, but they are still milking it to this day, and it's a good squeeze. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna say that it's cheap. It's still a good squeeze. And nowadays, Nintendo and PlayStation are, yes, they both make video game consoles, but no, they are not competitors in any way. The Nintendo Switch is like a B console to everybody's A of choice, PlayStation or Xbox. So if you get an Xbox, that doesn't stop you from getting a Switch. If you get a PlayStation, that doesn't stop you from getting a Switch at all. And my final thoughts is that PlayStation relies heavily on, it relies heavily on third-party titles. So if it loses the third-party titles, it's out of here. If PlayStation never had Spider-Man, I probably would have never got a PlayStation. So I think having homegrown titles is something that's huge, and Nintendo has way more than that. So whatever console comes next, whether it be the Switch 2 or the Wii Super Deluxe, I don't care what comes out. Nintendo's always gonna have games that are gonna be on it and people can rely on and all that stuff. Whereas PlayStation comes out with a system and people are more worried about what third-party titles are going to be on it. So yeah, that's just my opinion. If you disagree, let me know. I want to hear your disagrees, because I bet you can't make me change my mind. Man, I have no clue how long this video is gonna be. I've been recording for the last hour and I've been making a lot of mistakes and all that other stuff. Who cares? I had a lot to say about this. So if this video ends up being 30 minutes, it ends up being 30 minutes. All right. You know what I mean? Let's be honest for a second. One weird thing I do want to know, I honestly, genuinely want to know, is how many of y'all started out gaming on hand-me-down products, or like maybe it wasn't hand-me-down, maybe you just started on an old system. Because I want to know how many people started like gaming on like the hottest system right now. You know what I'm saying? You're 5 years old and you have a PlayStation 5. I want to know who started out playing the older games because that's what was available to you and you didn't care because you didn't know any better. Spread love, give inspiration in all you do. I'm gonna take back the rest of my day and spread love, give inspiration in all you do, comment, hit the notification bell, like, subscribe. It really helps the channel out a lot. And let me know, also, I'm asking you to let me know a lot of stuff, but one more thing. Do you guys like the longer videos? You know what I'm saying? The longer videos are a little bit different because the longer videos, the longer videos are a little bit different because the longer videos are different because they're edited differently. They're not edited to be like as captivating as time goes on. It's just more like of a sit and explaining, you know what I'm saying? I'm just talking candidly to the mic. You know what I'm saying? I want to see how you know, different it is. Maybe I don't know what happens. I don't know the future. I don't know how. I don't know what you guys like. Okay, I'm just trying out here. I'm just trying my best. Okay, gosh. Anyways, spread love, give inspiration, all you do, and peace out. You know the drill by now.
Welcome to the Crash Show. Take 2.